So you are listening to Policy Matters. The Fort Wayne Area League of Women Voters have worked together to establish this new show on WELT 97.5 on your radio dial. And we are facilitating nonpartisan conversations about public policy topics of interest and sometimes some upcoming events. This topic, we are going to be exploring the Electoral College. Not a whole lot of people have a lot of background on this, and so we are excited to be able to discuss this on this show with you this evening. This show will air again on Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. on the second and fourth Wednesdays of each month. So each show runs twice, and so this one will run again on the second Monday in March, and then we'll switch to a different topic after that. These programs are posted on the local League of Women Voter website at www.lwvfw.org. And previous shows can be found there as well on Women's Equality Day, redistricting, which is a big topic right now at the state level, voting processes, things to do with the veterans and the VA hospital here in town. So, and in March, we'll be talking about Women's History Month. So we'll have a variety of different things to share with you. So today, though, we're talking about Electoral College. And this is part of a series called Gray Matters. And I will let you talk a little bit about what that is and what how people could get involved in that.
Okay. I created Gray Matters about a year ago. We ran a handful of the events in 2016, and then now 2017, we're really ramping it up and having one event in most of the months of the year. We're taking off May and December. But I created Gray Matters because I saw a problem in my country, in our country, and wanted to do something about it. And that problem was a decline in the feeling of political efficacy, or the average political efficacy around the country. And that term is pretty much a political scientist term, but it's used to describe a handful of different things that each person in our country feels to a different extent. So there's internal political efficacy, which is the feeling that a person knows political issues, knows something about them, and can express them in a coherent way. So as an example for today, it would be, do you feel that you know a lot about the Electoral College, or at least something about it, and do you feel that you can speak about it? And then external political efficacy is a person's feeling that they know who to contact in the government to express their opinion on political efficacy, or on the Electoral College, using that same example, and that once they do approach that person, expressing their opinion, that opinion will make a difference. So political efficacy describes basically a person's desire and ability to get involved in running their country. Aristotle said that a citizen is a person who has a share in ruling and being ruled. And so what I see in our country, and this is backed up by political science research, is a decline in our ability to help rule. And that's concurrent with a decline in political efficacy. So I created Gray Matters to teach people about different policy topics and teach them how to talk about them. So Gray Matters is not a panel discussion. It's not experts getting up there and talking at you. I boil the information down to about a 2-page information sheet, and you get to read through it, and you get the same information as everybody else, and you can do research ahead of time if you want. And then we sit down and we talk about it. And even if you're new to the topic, you are encouraged to express your opinion on it, no matter your level of knowledge. And then at the end of the event, we go over ways to get further involved on that topic. So I give links for further research. We give out the contact information for various representatives. I give information on current legislation that is applicable to that topic. And so hopefully you don't just come and learn something, but you come and learn something that can then spur action.
Thank you. I should mention, first of all, that you were just listening to Megan Butler. I believe I forgot to introduce you, who hosts Gray Matters. And she was invited to be on this radio show with League of Women Voters because at a recent League meeting, several people who are League members had attended the Gray Matters workshop on the Electoral College or meeting and thought that it was really interesting and fascinating. And even though they had been, lifelong members of League of Women Voters, hadn't really studied that particular topic in any great detail. And there are other interesting topics coming up, too, which we'll remind you of at the end of the show. But, for example, in February, it's going to be about lobbying and PACs. The March is freedom of speech. April is children's rights. June is welfare and poverty. July, political economy. August, immigration. September, bureaucracy. That's a big conversation already. October, U.S. foreign policy. And November, terrorism. So they have a big variety of different topics to talk about in a very small amount of time for the topic that each one is. But I think the idea of focusing on what it really is sort of big picture background democracy issues, I think is a pretty exciting way, in a kind of policy wonk sort of way, to put perspective on what's going on now. Yep. I think a lot of people, myself included, are feeling pretty overwhelmed by all of the change that's happening. Whether you're for or against it, it's still change, and it's a lot to absorb at the moment. And I think that, sort of putting things in perspective, and I think, looking at some of the notes that you'll be hearing shortly about the Electoral College really does give you an overview. These things have happened before. They'll happen again. We will likely survive. And here are some of the things that we can learn if we look back. And so I think that maybe starting with some baseline definitions is a good place to start, so that people are sort of on the same page about, what language you use when you talk about Electoral College.
Yeah. So I think there is a common misconception when you hear the term Electoral College, like it's this weird college where people get together and they vote on the president. What it is a way that we elect the president, and the president only. So an elector is a term used interchangeably, and that does not help the confusion on the topic, but it's used interchangeably to refer either to the person who's chosen to cast the vote or the vote itself. So the Electoral College is a system set up where each state gets a certain number of people or votes that are then cast to elect the president. So what most people know about the Electoral College is there's this intermediary that it's not by popular vote. And that's sort of true. Typically, electors are more or less bound to vote in the way that the popular vote went in their state. Most states are winner take all, with the exception of Nebraska and Maine. So using Indiana as an example, we have 2 senators and 9 representatives, and so those add up to 11, and so we get 11 electoral votes. Some states have huge numbers of electoral votes because they have more representatives, and we all know that every state has 2 senators. So states like Texas and California just are massive and winner take all. So in those states, if a presidential candidate wins the popular vote by 1 vote, amongst many, many, many millions, then they get all of those electoral votes. And so that's when we get that system is why we get elections where someone can win the popular vote and still lose the election. So when we're voting, when we go to the voting booth in November of a presidential election year, we are in effect actually voting for who the elector will end up casting their vote for. Each state chooses electors differently. The founders left it up to states to figure out how they would appoint electors. But in Indiana, we choose our electors during the primary elections of the presidential election year. And so then those people who the people elected by their party to be the electors, whose candidate won the popular vote in that state, then get to go cast those votes for the president. So in Indiana, Donald Trump carried our state in the popular vote, and so the Republican electors got to go cast their votes. So you're always actually in the election ending up with 2, or I should say before the election, ending up with 2 sets of electors, and then sort of one set are the winners and one set are the losers, and the winners get to go cast their vote for president. So that's what the Electoral College is. It's a little convoluted, but that's what it is.
Right. Well, it all makes perfect sense. I think that people oftentimes don't pay much attention to that even existing until there is a situation that we've had twice relatively recently where the popular vote elects one person and the Electoral College elects a different person.
Yeah.
And then people go, wait, how could that happen? And then we'll talk about how that can happen. That's exactly what this show is going to help answer that question, I guess, or at least give you perspective on how that can happen. And I think that, I've heard interest in talking with people about, well, then maybe we should change that. Right. Isn't there something that we can do about that? How can we let this happen? And and historically, it hasn't just happened that the Democrat lost and the Republican won. Historically, that has gone both ways. Yeah. Recently, it has gone in favor of a Republican, but historically, that isn't the way it goes. And so I think that people need to sort of look at the history and why it was set up in the first place the way it was, before you start going around changing things just willy-nilly because you don't like how it came out. That really isn't sportsmanship if you start changing the rules just because you lost. Right. So tell us a little bit about the history of how the Electoral College was set up and why, and what is it supposed to do?
So the Electoral College was created originally in the Constitution. So it goes really all the way back to the founding of our country. And it was created for a couple of reasons. A lot of us know that during the constitutional debates, during the convention, that there were a lot of debates. There was lots of back and forth, and there was a lot of compromise. So it was set up as a bit of a compromise. And there are a couple of things that helped inform this compromise. One was a fear of the tyranny of the majority. So if you look at particularly our original Constitution, before it began being amended, there were a lot of things written into it that took, if I'm going to use a modern phrase, took the power away from the people. So to begin with, senators were not popularly elected. That was changed later. A lot of people don't realize that, but a lot of things were put into the Constitution originally so that the tyranny of the majority wasn't as much of an issue. They wanted to have a calming effect on leadership and on government, and one way to do that was to indeed take some power away from people who might only pay attention once every 4 years, and that at best. So the Electoral College was set up to, in Hamilton's words, who wrote Federalist 68, which was the explanation for why they created the Electoral College, it was set up to basically allow the men at the time who were most qualified to understand the job of the president and to make that judgment on who would do a good job, to give them more of a say in the matter, and those would be the electors. And then they actually also had a federal fallback in that if there was no clear winner of the Electoral College, it went to the House of Representatives. And so they placed all these different levels of insurance or checks and balances into the system so that we didn't have these chaotic elections that were constantly being challenged. We see that in modern day, a lot of modern day countries like countries in South America or countries in the Middle East where nobody's really sure who won the election. It's maybe not clear if there was corruption or not. And so they wanted a system that would have a clear winner, and the Electoral College was set up to do that. Another thing that Hamilton wrote, and I'm going to quote him here, as a purpose of the Electoral College was, quote, "Nothing was more to be desired than that every practicable obstacle should be opposed to cabal, intrigue, and corruption. Those most deadly adversaries of Republican government might naturally have been expected to make their approaches from more than one quarter, but chiefly from the desire in foreign powers to gain an improper ascendant in our councils." So they were very aware that foreign powers were going to try to come into our country when it was so new and influence things and influence it to their advantage.
Maybe when we're not so new.
Exactly. So they clearly had some wisdom in the matter, and they had a lot of good foresight, even if the solution that they offered maybe is not working so well anymore. But those were the intentions in creating the Electoral College in the first place. And then there was as well the issue of federalism, and that was really the big divide in the convention, the divide between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And this was a compromise designed to bridge that gap between those two groups.
Great. Well, and, as I say, the history is repeating itself.
Yeah.
So there have been 5 elections, is that correct?
Yeah.
Where the Electoral College has actually made the decision in the race.
Yeah.
And the popular vote did not agree.
Right.
So I'm familiar with 2 that have happened relatively recently. What were the other ones? Do you know?
I actually don't have that list in front of me.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay.
Never ask a question that we don't know the answer to. Look it up. Google it. So you can find out.
One really interesting example that's not quite an example of that, but one that I thought was fascinating and pointed out an issue that hadn't occurred to me before, was that in 1860, Abraham Lincoln won only 39% of the popular vote, but he won a plurality and he won the Electoral College. And so we can lament the fact that, when the Electoral College maybe doesn't work the way it's supposed to, is it having this terrible effect on our democracy? But I don't think many people would argue that they hoped that Abraham Lincoln wouldn't have won, even though he won only 39% of the popular vote. I don't think anyone would want to go back in history and change that.
Right. He turned out to be one of the most popular presidents.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Well, and maybe if not quite as popular in his time as he would have wished.
Yeah. Historically.
Yeah. He's very often considered the best president we've ever had in our country.
Right.
So it's a more complicated issue than just saying someone who lost the popular vote but won the Electoral College is corrupt and trying to take over the country. It's more complicated than that.
Right. So we'll see how history fares, but we won't know until many, many years from now.
Yeah.
how this all is looked back upon.
Yeah.
From a perspective. So we talked a little bit about why the college was set up and what it was supposed to do. What as hundreds of years later, what are some of the things that have turned out to be problematic? That there's we hear about the fact that certainly when people are running for office, they focus based upon the Electoral College votes, and so that's why, or other strategies, but sometimes they based it upon which state has an early primary, for example. Right. It's strategic. So this is why my sister-in-law and brother-in-law in New Hampshire know way more and are on first-name basis with every candidate that has ever gone through the political process, because New Hampshire is the first vote in the primaries and relatively small, and their process is designed to encourage candidates to come and they take, Iowa is kind of the same way. They take that role pretty seriously, and they're all pretty involved, I think, at the whole state. California obviously gets a lot of attention because it's so darn big,
right?
And East Coast in general and that sort of thing. So I think there's sort of a urban-rural kind of split sometimes. There's some conversation between the early states and the late states. Indiana historically has been a late state, and so a lot of times everything's kind of over by the time we vote, and so we're like, yeah, whatever,
Yep.
And I think that people have used that as an excuse for not voting. It's like, it's already decided. Why do they care what I think? Which may or may not be true at a presidential level, but it certainly is not true at the local and state level. And so, I would encourage everybody to use their vote and vote in non-presidential election years when your vote really does count for every race. But that's another topic altogether. So what if we just got rid of the Electoral College altogether? If it's causing so many problems, it's not working anymore. Let's just get rid of it. Why not?
Yeah. So I'll make a couple different points on that. It is exceptionally common, I should say extraordinarily common right now, particularly among Democrats/progressives, to say we need to get rid of the Electoral College. And of course, before he won the election, Donald Trump was saying we need to get rid of the Electoral College. But we're hearing that all over the place right now, and it's not super popular to make an opposing argument. I think Hamilton in Federalist 68 broke it down pretty well to say that the Electoral College prevents certain chaos from occurring in our elections. And to a large extent, that's been true. Most of the history of our country, our elections have been relatively unchaotic compared to a lot of other countries, and transitions of power have been relatively peaceful. We don't have revolutions happening every 4 years, even though people like to use that term. We don't really have revolutions every few years. Another argument against just outright abolishing the Electoral College is that one of the effects would be that we have a lot more political parties entering the system. And a lot of people, when they first hear that, they say, oh, that sounds great. Then we'll have more opinions, more candidates, be more competitive. And to a large extent, that would be true. But if you look at particularly parliamentary democracies in Europe, it's easy or easier in Europe to be elected and make it into parliament if you are, for example, the member of a Nazi party. There are parliaments in Europe that have members elected who are self-proclaimed Nazis. I don't think many people would argue that that's something that we want in our own country. I am an adherent to the belief that compromise is a good thing, even if it's not always a painless thing. It's good for the health of the democracy, just as it is good for the health of a family. So we want some compromise, but there are some clear issues with the Electoral College, a few of which you named, and I'll kind of expound on those. One is that when the founders set it up, they did not specify one national system for how it would be run in each state. And that was a compromise with people who didn't want this massive federal overlord looking at every state and controlling every state. So that's why we have these incredibly different systems, both in the election itself and in the primaries, really in the primaries, from state to state. And that makes it so complex to understand the system as a whole. It makes it more difficult to understand why presidential candidates are using the strategies that they are. You have to understand the laws in every single state to understand their strategies. And I'll give a little plug for Nate Silver here. The 538 blog does a fantastic job of breaking things down. In the past election, there were 2 websites I was really following to understand the mathematics and the strategies of the campaigns, and that was 538 and Politico. And so that's one issue, that it's this really convoluted system, not only at the federal level, but at the state level as well. And another issue that you mentioned was that there's this rural-urban divide, and that is absolutely the case, and probably easily one of, if not the biggest issue currently in the Electoral College. Mathematically speaking, rural states have, or majority rural states, have an undue influence on the presidential election. And I'll just give you the math breakdown as an example. Citizens in Wyoming, they have their vote counts for 3 times the vote of a person from California. So Wyoming contains 1/6 of the U.S. population, but has more than 1/2 of 1% of Electoral College votes. And that's because of the way we have our representatives and senators set up. So if representatives and senators were awarded based on population alone, Wyoming would have fewer Electoral College votes. And those states that have those fewer votes tend to be heavily rural. And so when you add them all up, they add up to a good number of votes. And states that have these populations that are just growing and tend to be urban are seeing their power diluted a lot more than rural states. Now, the counter argument to that mathematical argument is another mathematical argument. And that is that despite the fact that citizens in Wyoming, for example, have a heavier weight with their votes, candidates still tend to spend a lot more resources in large states. So citizens in California, their votes may count a little bit less than those in Wyoming. But they're still going to see their candidates more. They're going to see a lot more commercials. They're going to see more flyers. They're going to see more visits from those candidates. Now, that's a separate system then from the primary system, where it's not your size that matters quite as much as where you fall within the calendar. But between both systems, between the primary system and the way that plays out and the Electoral College system that applies then in the general election, you have citizens in some states being paid a lot more attention to, getting a lot more resources during the elections, both primary and general, and who then, as a result, have a lot more political knowledge, a lot more skin in the game, so to speak. And so, and research bears this out. Studies show this again and again. People who live in states that have early primaries and people who live in large states have more political knowledge and they're therefore more political efficacy than people in smaller states or people who are in states that are later in the primary process. So here in Indiana, we kind of get a double whammy. We're late in the primary process, so most of the contenders have already dropped out by the time they get to Indiana. In this last election, by the time we got to Indiana, Trump and Cruz were the only major players left in the election. Of course, people wrote in votes, but those were the two players at that point. And Indiana actually dealt the death blow to Ted Cruz, and after that he stepped down. But so we're late in the primary process, and then we only have 11 electoral votes, which is not the smallest, but it's not even close to being the biggest. So you see people in Indiana having a lot less political knowledge than people in other states, some other states might, and as a result feeling a lot less politically powerful. Washington feels much farther away when you don't feel like you have a voice in the process, and that fuels feelings of disconnect, feelings of resentment, feelings of they're not looking out for me, whoever they is and whoever you are. And it fuels that on both sides of the political aisle. And that, I think, is really the central problem that the Electoral College is contributing to. I do not think it is the only contributor, but I think it is absolutely contributing to this feeling that we, as a collective, don't have a say in our president. We don't have a say in the policies that are enacted by our president. We don't have a say in how our tax dollars are spent. And that spills over. So even though the Electoral College only applies in the presidential election every 4 years, I think that feeling of disconnect is spilling over into other elections in other years. So you're just seeing political participation, and that includes votes, that includes donating, that includes canvassing. You're seeing it decline across the board, and as a result, we're seeing policies across the board that are lobbyist-driven. We're seeing legislation that gets passed through with very little to no discussion or debate because legislators know they can pass it through, and people won't notice it. And we're seeing all of these ill effects. And actually, if you go back to Plato, way back to Plato, Plato predicted this. He wrote in the Republic about the devolution of governments, and he wrote that democracy always devolves into tyranny because in a democracy, people have the freedom to not care. They have the freedom to not pay attention, the freedom to not vote, the freedom to not learn about political policy. And with every successive generation, they will choose that more and more and more. How many of us choose to spend half an hour on Facebook rather than half an hour reading the Federalist Papers?
Me.
Yeah, and me too, to be honest. It's something we all do, and it's something that adds up over time. It adds up a lot. Just like if you didn't brush your teeth once in a while, okay, no big deal. But if you just forget to brush your teeth every single day, after a while, you're going to have some serious problems. And we're seeing that in our own country. And Plato said that. He said, look, after a while, people will not pay attention, and you're going to have a tyrant come along who's going to promise to solve all their problems, and they're going to buy it, and they're going to vote him into power, and then he's going to take away their rights. And some people might argue that that's happening. Maybe Trump supporters would not argue that that's happening, but there's definitely a decline in political efficacy that goes along with a decline in democracy. And Plato's student Aristotle then kind of expounded on Plato's argument. And Aristotle said that the way to keep a democracy healthy and alive is by political participation, having a share in ruling and being ruled, and by being educated. So it all comes back to education. And I will say this as a side note, just because we're all educated doesn't mean we're all going to agree. And that's just fine. But we do need to be educated, and we do need to participate. And only then will we have a healthy democracy. There's a social scientist, Robert Putnam, who's writing about this quite a bit. He wrote Bowling Alone. It's a really readable book, but he's writing about the decline in just civic participation, period. The decline in volunteer groups, the decline in participation in bowling groups, bowling leagues. And we're seeing this across the board, and we're seeing a lot of societal and political problems because of it. And I think the Electoral College is a significant contributor to that. Should we get rid of the Electoral College entirely? I don't know. Should we address some of the problems with it? I think that's a definitely an important discussion we need to be having.
Right. Well, and we are having it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that is really important. And I think that, one of the things that I really wasn't aware of until, I was listening to the conversation about the effects of the Electoral College in this particular race, and maybe just because I wasn't paying that much attention before, is how much difference each of the states' processes can make in how the Electoral College works, and the fact that each state can choose to, release its electors if they want to, for example, to vote their conscience, or they can choose to set up differently the way people are nominated to represent the state at the Electoral College level. I guess I didn't really realize that, that there was a state policy component to the Electoral College. Mm-hmm. I thought it was just, established in the federal government rules, and this is the way the federal government rules it.
Right.
But here in Indiana, we could, if we so chose, change the way that Indiana controls its delegates to the college.
Yeah.
And I think, people have made some suggestions on what that might look like. But I guess, the first thing would be to become more familiar with how do we do it.
Right.
And I can't say that I know that, really. But I think that would be one thing we could explore a little bit more and see if there was some reason why we might want to change that. Similar to changing the way we design the districts in which people are voting. We're talking about redistricting a lot this year because that's coming up because of the census. But that's another piece of the puzzle that allows for more public participation in the process. I mean, I hear so much people just don't even participate in the political process because their vote doesn't count, it doesn't matter, there's nobody to vote for. Maybe it's an uncontested race, or maybe it's already decided before it gets to Indiana for whatever reason. I think if we can address some of the issues that cause people to feel apathetic about public participation in their government, maybe we can actually get people more excited about it. Making it easier to vote would be another good example of that. If it wasn't so difficult to register, if it wasn't so difficult to vote, I think that we're on the right track. Having early voting and being able to make it easier to vote and letting people know about that is all good. But if people are just not feeling like their vote matters, then they're not going to go to any extent to even try to vote. But I digress. One of the things that I will add is that, since I asked the question and while Megan was talking, I tried to look up on my phone which other elections the Electoral College impacted. And I'm not positive that I've got the exact ones right, but according to Google, these were certainly contested elections that turned out differently than people thought. So one of the first ones they mentioned was 1948, Dewey and Truman. And I remember, sort of my high school history version of that, is the photo of the guy holding up the headline of the newspaper saying Dewey wins, and he did not. So misreporting the facts has gone on a long time in our media. Yep. And turns out actually that the Democrat in that particular race, Truman, had won that election. In 1988, it was Cleveland versus Harrison, and that's important to Indiana because Benjamin Harrison was the president who came from Indiana, and if you want to go visit his home, it's in Indianapolis, and you can tour it. That's what I know about him, and he was a Republican coming from Indiana. That's not terribly surprising. And that was another situation where the Electoral College chose him. So Indiana got to have a president for a while because of the Electoral College. And according to the Google search, of course, there was lots of conversation about fraud and voter fraud, especially in Indiana, and so there was that controversy back in that time. 28, it was John Quincy Adams versus Jackson was another close race, controversial. 1960, JFK versus Nixon was another one that was very, very close, and Kennedy won as a result of an Electoral College vote. So again, the Democrats won on that one. Most people would argue that JFK was a pretty influential president. Yep. And Nixon was too, for that matter, in his own way. So there was that. So it can happen. Like I say, it goes kind of both ways. I don't know. It's not really a winning and losing argument so much as, is the process working well? And people will argue that. And I don't know that there's a particular answer. It depends on how you look at the process. Yeah. And that's what we're doing. What do we want to leave people with here? What is the answer? What are the questions? Maybe we really kind of have more questions than answers, I think, at this point. Where do we go from here? What can people do here in their space to make a difference on this topic?
Yeah. First of all, wherever you are, if you're in Indiana or not, if you want to get involved on this topic in particular, you will want to check your state legislatures. They will put this on their websites. Any legislation that they're currently considering. Sometimes it's a little convoluted to find it. Sometimes it's written in legalese and a little hard to read. But you can always call your representative. It's easy enough to Google, and see if they're considering any legislation pertaining to redistricting or the Electoral College process. And you can also get involved in political parties, whatever side you fall on. Political parties are a whole other behemoth in this discussion that we almost haven't even touched on. And each party and each state makes its own rules for how it runs its party. And I can give you an example. Here in Indiana, the Democratic Party chooses its electors at its convention. So the congressional caucuses get together, and the caucuses are delegates to the convention who are elected. Those delegates get together in a caucus, depending on their congressional caucus, and then they elect their elector, who then is or is not, depending on who wins the popular vote, going to go cast the vote for president. So there's different levels that you can get involved on depending on your time, your resources, your desires. You can just call your legislator and say, look, I want you to vote this way on this topic, on this piece of legislation, or I want you to introduce a piece of legislation. And if they don't listen, get together with some friends or some coworkers or whomever and start a letter writing campaign, start a phone calling campaign. I will tell you, as a former Senate intern, the best way to make your voice heard is to call. Make sure you leave your address so they know that you're actually their constituent, and calmly and as intellectually as you can, express your opinion on the topic. Yelling does not help, and they do record those. They do keep them. We had to log every single phone call from a constituent that we ever got, and those numbers were tallied. And believe me, they did listen to them, because you have to remember, an elected official, no matter who they're getting money from, no matter what PAC or lobbyist is giving them money or whispering in their ear, they always have to get reelected. And every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years, their job is on the line, and you are their boss, and you either hire them back or you don't. And so if enough of their bosses say, look, this is what we want you to do, they're going to have to listen at a certain point. So numbers in that sense really matter. Your voice really does matter. So you can do that. It's easy to make a phone call. It takes 5 minutes. Or you can get even more involved. Get involved in your local party. Start a group. Go to a discussion. Talk to your family. And of course, you can get involved in the League of Women Voters. There's a lot of different things you can do depending on your interests and your strengths. So you just have to put yourself out there and try.
Right. Well, and that's a great segue to put in a plug for the League of Women Voters, because I know I am not particularly interested in researching all of these topics like Megan is. I'm interested in some things of them, but not all of them on a deeper level. So that's why I really appreciate the League of Women Voters. A lot of women and men spend a lot of time thinking through the pros and cons and the processes of all sorts of different topics. If you go to the National League page, there are policy positions on just about everything. At the more local level in Indiana, our Indiana League of Women Voters has policy positions on things that are specific to Indiana. And at the local level, our local league also talks about things that are specific to Fort Wayne and Allen County and Northeast Indiana. And so I don't have to know it all, because I can go look it up. And as long as I know where to look it up, I don't need to know it. And that's the way I figure. So the place where you can do that is just the League of Women Voters. It's LWV. And at the national level, it is just LWV. You can just type that in to your search engine and it will pop right up. Or you can type in League of Women Voters. And you can get to the state page from the national page, and you can get to the local page from the state page, and vice versa. And we are working on trying to get. We will try to get Megan's Gray Matters link to her discussion group on our League of Women Voters local page, as well as this program, so that if you don't happen to catch it live, or well, recorded, but when it runs on the WELT station, you'll be able to link to it along with our other programs on the League of Women Voters Fort Wayne, LWVFW. That is so hard to say. And find us there. So if you didn't catch it all, you're just now catching the show, and you're like, oh, I wish I'd listened to the rest of it, you'll be able to do that. And also, WELT is also available nationwide in a variety of different ways. And I'm just amazed at the people who call into the live shows on this station from all over the place, or they're texting in, or participating in the Facebook page conversations, because you can access it through the TuneIn app on your phone. You can, or Radio Free America also has a link to WELT 95.7 FM. There are other 95.7 stations in the world. So you remember the call letters and the numbers together, and the fact that it's in Fort Wayne, Indiana, will get you to this particular station. And those were up for 2 weeks usually on programming on radiofreeamerica.com. And then you can just go to our station, WELT-LP, and get those shows there as well. So WELT is a non-commercial, listener-supported, member-controlled community radio station licensed by the FCC to broadcast within Allen County, Indiana, from the studios at the downtown branch of the Allen County Public Library. WELT's volunteers and staff promote communication, education, entertainment, and understanding by providing quality programming and services to the Fort Wayne community. By providing a forum for both the discussion of public issues and the expansion of musical and cultural experiences, WELT facilitates community expression by giving Allen County access to the airwaves and this is a good example of that. Nowhere else in the world will you probably spend an hour talking about the Electoral College. Woohoo! And you heard it here first. And we're excited to provide it to you. And we're looking forward to talking with Megan about some of her next upcoming sessions that she will be having during Gray Matters. And again, we will put those links up on our webpage, on the League of Women Voters webpage. The next one is going to be February 27th.
Yep.
About lobbyists and PACs. And can you tell people where to go to find that? If they wanted to participate, how would they let you know, and where would they attend? How would they attend that? It's at 6 p.m. at the Allen County Democratic Party headquarters,
Yes.
which is down on...
It's on Decatur Road.
Decatur
I think
Road.
the number is 7209.
Great.
But
Yeah.
it's in the Bricklayers Union Hall.
Right. Okay. There you go. So you are welcome to join us at that event, or join Megan at any rate, and her fellow learners there at that event. And we appreciate you participating with us for this hour-ish or so, talking about this topic. And we look forward to hearing from you, we look forward to you hearing from us again in March, when Nancy McCammon Hansen is going to be doing a presentation about Women's History Month, which is March. And we're also going to be hosting a movie night at Cinema Center, I believe on March 5th, but I don't think that's been finalized yet. But so we'll watch for that on the League of Women Voters Facebook page and our website. And I think it's going to be free. And it should be a good movie, but I don't know what it is. So we're still working on the details. So stay tuned and stay involved. I think really one of the fascinating things that has been an end result of this contentious election has been the energy that it has created, that there are so many more people out there getting involved, marching on one side and the other, and gathering on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and other social media that I don't even know exists, and in people's homes and at locations like the library, to get involved and to say, hey, wait, what's going on here? I need to pay attention to this. And that's always healthy, I think. The more people who are involved, the better. And I think the more interesting the conversation and the more likely it is that we'll have good answers.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us, and we appreciate your listening, and we will look forward to being with you again. This is Betsy Kachmar and Megan Butler signing off from the WELT studios on the League of Women Voters Policy Matters show. See you soon.